Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
Well, now, look who's wandered back into the pines and poked at my fire. Thought I heard your footsteps on the gravel, and sure enough, here you are again. I'm Otis Jiry, your fireside friend, whispering guide through tales too old and too strange to stay buried. You found yourself at Tales from Duskwood, coming to you from the edge of Twilight Lake, where the wind carries voices and the past. Well, sometimes it gets tired of waiting to be remembered. Tonight's episode is called Below the World of Men, and that's not just poetic flair, campers. We're going underground, down where secrets rot in stone, where memory turns to judgment, and where the dark has had a lot longer to think than you have. We've got two tales tonight, both penned by the great Sir Arthur Conan Doyle himself. And they aren't his usual fare of pipe-smoking detectives and tidy conclusions. No, sir. These are stories that crawl beneath your skin and stay there. First up, we head to Rome, to a catacomb that should have stayed sealed. Then we're off to the hills of Derbyshire, where an ailing doctor learns what really lives beneath the earth. So, settle in, keep your lanterns close, and your conscience closer. The stone remembers more than we think. Let's begin. Ever known someone who thought charm could outwit consequence? A man too clever to think the past might catch up with him? In our first tale tonight, a rich young archaeologist pushes his rival a bit too far and winds up on a private tour of a tomb no map dares mark. It's a story of pride, betrayal, and a darkness deeper than death. Without further ado, I present to you The New Catacomb by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. "Look here, Burger," said Kennedy, "I do wish that you would confide in me." The two famous students of Roman remains sat together in Kennedy's comfortable room overlooking the Corso. The night was cold, and they had both pulled up their chairs to the unsatisfactory Italian stove, which threw out a zone of stuffiness rather than of warmth. Outside, under the bright winter stars, lay the modern Rome, the long double chain of the electric lamps, the brilliantly lighted cafes, the rushing carriages, and the dense throng upon the footpaths. But inside, in the sumptuous chamber of the rich young English archaeologist, there was only old Rome to be seen. Cracked and time-worn friezes hung upon the walls, gray old busts of senators and soldiers with their fighting heads and their hard, cruel faces peered out from the corners. On the center table, amidst a litter of inscriptions, fragments, and ornaments, there stood the famous reconstruction by Kennedy of the Baths of Caracalla, which excited such interest and admiration when it was exhibited in Berlin. Amphorae hung from the ceiling, and a litter of curiosities strewed the rich red Turkey carpet. In all of them there was not one which was not of the most unimpeachable authenticity and of the utmost rarity and value. For Kennedy, though little more than 30, had a European reputation in this particular branch of research, and was, moreover, provided with that long purse which either proves to be a fatal handicap to the student's energies, or, if his mind is still true to its purpose, gives him an enormous advantage in the race for fame. Kennedy had often been seduced by whim and pleasure from his studies, but his mind was an incisive one, capable of long and concentrated efforts which ended in sharp reactions of sensuous languor. His handsome face, with its high white forehead, its aggressive nose, and its somewhat loose and sensual mouth, was a fair index of the compromise between strength and weakness in his nature. Of a very different type was his companion, Julius Burger. He came from a curious blend, a German father and an Italian mother, with the robust qualities of the North mingling strangely with the softer graces of the South. Blue Teutonic eyes lightened his brown-faced skin, and above them rose a square, massive forehead, with a fringe of close yellow curls lying around it. His strong, firm jaw was clean-shaven, and his companion had frequently remarked how much it suggested those old Roman busts which peered out from the shadows in the corner of his chamber. Under its bluff, German strength there lay always a suggestion of Italian subtlety, but the smile was so honest and the eyes so frank that one understood that this was only an indication of his ancestry, with no actual bearing upon his character. In age and in reputation, he was on the same level as his English companion, but his life and his work had been both far more arduous. 12 years before, he had come as a poor student to Rome, and had lived ever since upon some small endowment for research which had been awarded to him by the University of Bonn. Painfully, slowly, and doggedly, with extraordinary tenacity and single-mindedness, he climbed from rung to rung of the ladder of fame, until now he was a member of the Berlin Academy, and there was every reason to believe that he would shortly be promoted to the chair of the greatest of German universities. But the singleness of purpose which had brought him to the same high level as the rich and brilliant Englishman had caused him, in everything outside their work, to stand infinitely below him. He had never found a pause in his studies in which to cultivate the social graces. It was only when he spoke of his own subject that his face was filled with life and soul. At other times he was silent and embarrassed, too conscious of his own limitations in larger subjects, and impatient of that small talk which is the conventional refuge of those who have no thoughts to express. And yet, for some years there had been an acquaintanceship which appeared to be slowly ripening into a friendship between these two very different rivals. The base and origin of this lay in the fact that in their own studies each was the only one of the younger men who had knowledge and enthusiasm enough to properly appreciate the other. Their common interests and pursuits had brought them together, and each had been attracted by the other's knowledge. And then, gradually, something had been added to this. Kennedy had been amused by the frankness and simplicity of his rival, while Burger, in turn, had been fascinated by the brilliancy and vivacity which had made Kennedy such a favorite in Roman society. I say had, because just at the moment the young Englishman was somewhat under a cloud. A love affair, the details of which had never quite come out, had indicated a heartlessness and callousness upon his part which shocked many of his friends. But in the bachelor circles of students and artists in which he preferred to move, there is no very rigid code of honor in such matters, and though a head might be shaken or a pair of shoulders shrugged over the flight of the two and the return of one, the general sentiment was probably one of curiosity, and perhaps of envy rather than of reprobation. "Look here, Burger," said Kennedy, looking hard at the placid face of his companion, "I do wish that you would confide in me." As he spoke, he waved his hand in the direction of a rug which lay upon the floor. On the rug stood a long, shallow fruit basket of the light wicker-work which is used in the Campagna, and this was heaped with a litter of objects, inscribed tiles, broken inscriptions, cracked mosaics, torn papyri, rusty metal ornaments, which to the uninitiated might have seemed to have come straight from a dustman's bin, but which a specialist would have speedily recognized as unique of their kind. The pile of odds and ends in the flat wickerwork basket supplied exactly one of those missing links of social development which are of such interest to the student. It was the German who brought them in, and the Englishman's eyes were hungry as he looked them over. "I won't interfere with your treasure trove, but I should very much like to hear about it," he continued, while Burger very deliberately lit a cigar. "It is evidently a discovery of the first importance. These inscriptions will make a sensation throughout Europe." "For everyone here, there are 1,000,000 there," said the German. "There are so many that a dozen savants might spend a lifetime over them, and build up a reputation as solid as the castle of St. Angelo." Kennedy sat thinking, with his fine forehead wrinkled and his fingers playing with his long, fair mustache. "You have given yourself away, Burger," he said at last. "Your words can only apply to one thing. You've discovered a new catacomb." "I had no doubt that you had already come to that conclusion from an examination of these objects." "Well, they certainly appear to indicate it, but your last remarks make it certain. There's no place except a catacomb which could contain so vast a store of relics as you describe." "Quite so. There is no mystery about that. I have discovered a new catacomb." "Where?" "Ah, that is my secret, my dear Kennedy. Suffice it that it is so situated that there's not a chance in 1,000,000 of anyone else coming upon it. Its date is different from that of any known catacomb, and it has been reserved for the burial of the highest Christians, so that the remains and the relics are quite different from anything which has ever been seen before. If I was not aware of your knowledge and of your energy, my friend, I would not hesitate, under the pledge of secrecy, to tell you everything about it. But as it is, I think that I must certainly prepare my own report of the matter before I expose myself to such formidable competition." Kennedy loved his subject with a love which was almost a mania, a love which held him true to it, amidst all the distractions which come to a wealthy and dissipated young man. He had ambition, but his ambition was secondary to his mere abstract joy and interest in everything which concerned the old life and history of the city. He yearned to see this new underworld which his companion had discovered. "Look here, Burger," he said earnestly. "I assure you that you can trust me most implicitly in the matter. Nothing would induce me to put pen to paper about anything which I see until I have your express permission. I quite understand your feeling, and I think it is most natural, but you have really nothing whatsoever to fear from me. On the other hand, if you don't tell me, I shall make a systematic search, and I shall most certainly discover it. In that case, of course, I should make what use I like of it, since I should be under no obligation to you." Burger smiled thoughtfully over his cigar. "I have noticed, friend Kennedy," he said, "that when I want information over any point, you are not always so ready to supply it. When did you ever ask me anything that I did not tell you? You remember, for example, my giving you the material for your paper about the Temple of the Vestals?" "Ah, well, that was not a matter of much importance. If I were to question you upon some intimate thing, would you give me an answer, I wonder? This new catacomb is a very intimate thing to me, and I should certainly expect some sign of confidence in return." "What you are driving at I cannot imagine," said the Englishman. "But if you mean that you'll answer my question about the catacomb, if I answer any question which you may put to me, I can assure you that I will certainly do so." "Well, then," said Burger, leaning luxuriously back in his settee and puffing a blue tree of cigar smoke into the air, "tell me about your relations with Miss Mary Saunderson." Kennedy sprang up in his chair and glared angrily at his impassive companion. "What the devil do you mean?" he cried. "What sort of question is this? You may mean it as a joke, but you never made a worse one." "No, I didn't mean it as a joke," said Burger, simply. "I'm really rather interested in the details of the matter. I don't know much about the world and women and social life and that sort of thing, and such an incident has the fascination of the unknown for me. I know you, and I knew her by sight. I even had spoken to her once or twice. I should very much like to hear from your own lips exactly what it was which occurred between you. I won't tell you a word." "That's all right. It was only my whim to see if you would give up a secret as easily as you expected me to give up my secret of the new catacomb. You wouldn't, and I didn't expect you to. But why should you expect otherwise of me? There's St. John's clock striking 10. It is quite time that I was going home." "No, wait a bit, Burger," said Kennedy. "This is really a ridiculous caprice of yours, to wish to know about an old love affair which has burned out months ago. You know we look upon a man who kisses and tells as the greatest coward and villain possible." "Certainly," said the German, gathering up his basket of curiosities. "When he tells anything about a girl which is previously unknown, he must be so. But in this case, as you must be aware, it was a public matter which was the common talk of Rome, so that you're not really doing Miss Mary Saunderson any injury by discussing her case with me. But still, I respect your scruples, and so good night." "Wait a minute, Burger," said Kennedy, laying his hand upon the other's arm. "I am very keen upon this catacomb business, and I can't let it drop quite so easily. Would you mind asking me something else in return? Something not quite so eccentric this time?" No. You've refused, and there's an end of it," said Burger, with his basket on his arm. "No doubt you are quite right not to answer, and no doubt I am quite right also. And so, again, my dear Kennedy, good night." The Englishman watched Burger cross the room, and he had his hand on the handle of the door before his host sprang up with the air of a man who is making the best of that which cannot be helped. "Hold on, old fellow," he said. "I think you are behaving in a most ridiculous fashion. But still, if this is your condition, I suppose that I must submit to it. I hate saying anything about the girl, but, as you say, it is all over Rome, and I don't suppose I can tell you anything which you don't already know. What was it you wanted to know?" The German came back to the stove, and, laying down his basket, he sank into his chair once more. "May I have another cigar?" he said. "Thank you very much. I never smoke when I work, but I enjoy a chat much more when I'm under the influence of tobacco. Now, as regards this young lady with whom you had this little adventure, what in the world has become of her?" "She is at home with her own people." "Oh, really? In England?" "Yes." "What part of England? London?" "No, Twickenham." "You must excuse my curiosity, my dear Kennedy, and you must put it down to my ignorance of the world. No doubt it is quite a simple thing to persuade a young lady to go off with you for 3 weeks or so, and then to hand her over to her own family at, what do you call the place?" "Twickenham." "Quite so, at Twickenham. But it is something so entirely outside my own experience that I cannot even imagine how you set about it. For example, if you had loved this girl, your love could hardly disappear in 3 weeks. So I presume that you could not have loved her at all. But if you did not love her, why should you make this great scandal which has damaged you and ruined her?" Kennedy moodily looked into the red eye of the storm. "That's a logical way of looking at it, certainly," said he. "Love is a big word, and it represents a good many different shades of feeling. I liked her, and, well, you say you've seen her. You know how charming she could look. But still, I am willing to admit, looking back, that I could never really have loved her. Then, my dear Kennedy, why did you do it? The adventure of the thing had a great deal to do with it. What? You are so fond of adventures. Where would the variety of life be without them? It was for an adventure that I first began to pay my attentions to her. I've chased a good deal of game in my time, but there's no chase like that of a pretty woman. There was the piquant difficulty of it also, for as she was the companion of Lady Emily Rood, it was almost impossible to see her alone. On the top of all the other obstacles which attracted me, I learned from her very own lips, very early in the proceedings, that she was engaged. Mein Gott! To whom? She mentioned no names. I do not think that anyone knows that. So that made the adventure more alluring, did it? Well, it certainly did give a spice to it. Don't you think so? I tell you that I am very ignorant about these things. My dear fellow, you can remember that the apple you stole from your neighbor's tree was always sweeter than that which fell from your own, and then I found out she cared for me. What, at once? Oh, no. It took about 3 months of sapping and mining, but at last I won her over. She understood that my judicial separation from my wife made it impossible for me to do the right thing by her, but she came all the same, and we had a delightful time as long as it lasted. But how about the other man? Kennedy shrugged his shoulders. I suppose it's the survival of the fittest, he said. If he had been the better man, she would not have deserted him. Let's drop the subject, for I've had enough of it. Only one other thing. How did you get rid of her in 3 weeks? Well, we had both cooled down a bit, you understand. She absolutely refused, under any circumstances, to come back to face the people she had known in Rome. Now, of course, Rome is necessary to me, and I was already pining to be back at my work, so there was one obvious cause of separation. Then again, her old father turned up at the hotel in London, and there was a scene, and the whole thing became so unpleasant that really, though I missed her dreadfully at first, I was very glad to slip out of it. Now I rely upon you not to repeat anything of what I have said. My dear Kennedy, I should not dream of repeating it, but all that you say interests me very much, for it gives me an insight into your way of looking at things, which is entirely different from mine, for I have seen so little of life. And now you want to know about my new catacomb. There's no use me trying to describe it, for you would never find it by that. There's only one thing, and that is for me to take you there. Well, that would be splendid. When would you like to come? The sooner the better. I am all impatience to see it. Well, it is a beautiful night, though a trifle cold. Suppose we start in an hour. We must be very careful to keep the matter to ourselves. If anyone saw us hunting in couples, they would suspect that there was something going on. We can't be too cautious, said Kennedy. Is it far? Some miles. Not too far to walk? Oh, no, we could walk there easily. We had better do so, then. The cabman's suspicions would be aroused if he dropped us both at some lonely spot in the dead of night. Quite so. I think it would be best for us to meet at the gate of the Appian Way at midnight. I must go back to my lodgings for the matches and candles and things. All right, Burger. I think it is very kind of you to let me into this secret, and I promise you that I will write nothing about it until you've published your report. Goodbye for the present. You'll find me at the gate at 12. The cold, clear air was filled with the musical chimes from the city of clocks as Burger, wrapped in an Italian overcoat, with a lantern hanging from his hand, walked up to the rendezvous. Kennedy stepped out of the shadow to meet him. "You are ardent in work as well as in love," said the German, laughing. Yes, I've been waiting here for nearly half an hour. I hope you left no clue as to where we were going. Oh, not such a fool. By Jove, I'm chilled to the bone. Come on, Burger. Let us warm ourselves by the spirit of hard walking. Their footsteps sounded loud and crisp upon the rough stone paving of the disappointing road, which is all that's left of the most famous highway of the world. A peasant or two going home from the wine shop, and a few carts of country produce coming up to Rome were the only things which they met. They swung along with the huge tombs looming up through the darkness upon each side of them until they had come as far as the catacombs of St. Callistus, and saw against a rising moon the great circular bastion of Cecilia Metella in front of them. Then Burger stopped with his hand to his side. "Your legs are longer than mine, and you are more accustomed to walking," said he, laughing. "I think that the place where we turned off is somewhere here. Yes, there it is, round the corner of the trattoria. Now it is a very narrow path, so perhaps I'd better go in front and you can follow." He had lit his lantern, and by its light they were enabled to follow a narrow and devious track which wound across the marshes of the Campagna. The great aqueduct of old Rome lay like a monstrous caterpillar across the moonlit landscape, and their road led them under one of its huge arches, and past the circle of crumbling bricks which marks the old arena. At last Burger stopped at a solitary wooden cowhouse, and he drew a key from his pocket. "Surely your catacomb is not inside a house," cried Kennedy. "The entrance to it is. That is just the safeguard which we have against anyone else discovering it." "Does the proprietor know of it?" "Not he. He found one or two objects which made me almost certain that his house was built on the entrance to such a place. So I rented it from him and did my excavations for myself. Come in and shut the door behind you." It was a long, empty building with the mangers of the cows along one wall. Burger put his lantern down on the ground and shaded its light in all directions save one by draping his overcoat round it. "It might excite remark if anyone saw a light in this lonely place," said he. "Just help me move this boarding." The flooring was loose in the corner, and plank by plank the two savants raised it and leaned it against the wall. Below there was a square aperture and a stair of old stone steps which led away down into the bowels of the earth. "Be careful," cried Burger, as Kennedy, in his impatience, hurried down them. It was a perfect rabbit's warren below, and if you were once to lose your way there, the chances would be 100 to 1 against your ever coming out again. Wait until I bring the light." "How do you find your own way if it's so complicated?" "I had some very narrow escapes at first, but I have gradually learned to go about it. There's a certain system to it, but it is one which a lost man, if he were in the dark, could not possibly find out. Even now I always spin out a ball of string behind me when I'm going far into the catacomb. You can see for yourself that it's difficult, but every one of these passages divides and subdivides a dozen times before you even go 100 yards. They had descended some 20 feet from the level of the bar, and they were standing now in a square chamber cut out of soft tufa. The lantern cast a flickering light, bright yellow and dim above, over the cracked brown walls. In every direction were the black openings of passages which radiated from this common center. "I want you to follow me closely, my friend," said Bircher. "Do not loiter to look at anything upon the way, for the place to which I will take you contains all that you can see and more. It will save time for us to go there direct." He led the way down one of the corridors, and the Englishman followed closely at his heels. Every now and then the passage bifurcated, but Burger was evidently following some secret marks of his own, for he neither stopped nor hesitated. Everywhere along the walls, packed like the berths upon an emigrant ship, lay the Christians of old Rome, The yellow light flickered over the shriveled features of the mummies and gleamed upon rounded skulls and long white armbones crossed over fleshless chests. And everywhere as he passed, Kennedy looked with wistful eyes upon inscriptions, funeral vessels, pictures, vestments, utensils, all lying as pious hands had placed them so many centuries ago. It was apparent to him, even in those hurried passing glances, that this was the earliest and finest of the catacombs, containing such a storehouse of Roman remains as had ever before come at one time upon the observation of the student. "What would happen if the light went out?" he asked as they hurried onwards. "I have a spare candle and a box of matches in my pocket. By the way, Kennedy, have you any matches?" "No. You'd better give me some." "Oh, that is all right. There is no chance of our separating." "How far are we going? It seems to me that we've walked at least a quarter of a mile." "Oh, more than that, I think. There's really no limit to the tombs. At least I've never been able to find any. This is a very difficult place, so I think that I'll use our ball of string." He fastened one end of it to a projecting stone, and he carried the coil in the breast of his coat, paying it out as he advanced. Kennedy saw that it was no unnecessary precaution, for the passages become more complex and tortuous than ever, with a perfect network of intersecting corridors. But these all ended in one large circular hall, with a square pedestal of tufu, toppled with a slab of marble at one end of it. "By Jove!" cried Kennedy in an ecstasy, as Burger swung his lantern over the marble. "It's a Christian altar, probably the first one in existence. Here is the little consecration cross cut upon the corner of it. No doubt this circular space was also used as a church." "Precisely," said Burger. "If I had more time, I should like to show you all the bodies which are buried in these niches upon the walls, for they are the early popes and bishops of the church, with their mitres, their croziers, and full canonicals. Go over to that one and look at it." Kennedy went across and stared at the ghastly head, which lay loosely on the shredded and mouldering mitre. "This is most interesting," said he, and his voice seemed to boom against the concave vault. "As far as my experience goes, it's unique. Bring the lantern over, Burger, for I want to see them all." But the German had strolled away and was standing in the middle of a yellow circle of light at the other side of the hall. "Do you know how many wrong turnings there are between this and the stairs?" he asked. "There are over 2,000. No doubt it was one of the means of protection which the Christians adopted. The odds are 2,000 to 1 against a man getting out, even if he had a light. But if he were in the dark, it would, of course, be far more difficult." "So I should think. And the darkness is something dreadful. I tried it once for an experiment. Let us try it again." He stooped to the lantern, and in an instant it was as if an invisible hand was squeezed tightly over each of Kennedy's eyes. Never had he known what such darkness was. It seemed to press upon him and to smother him. It was such an obstacle, a solid obstacle, against which the body shrank from advancing. He put his hands out to push it back from him. "That will do, Burger," he said. "Let's have the light again." But his companion began to laugh, and in that circular room the sound seemed to come from every side at once. "You seem uneasy, friend Kennedy," said he. "Go on, man. Light the candle," said Kennedy impatiently. "It's very strange, Kennedy, but I could not in the least tell by the sound in which direction you stand. Could you tell me where I am?" "No. You seem to be on every side of me. If it were not for this string which I hold in my hand, I should not have a notion which way to go." "I dare say not. Strike a light, man, and have an end of this nonsense." "Well, Kennedy, there are two things which I understand that you are very fond of. The one is an adventure, and the other is an obstacle to surmount. The adventure must be the finding of your way out of this catacomb. The obstacle will be the darkness and the 2,000 wrong turns which make the way a little difficult to find. But you need not hurry, for you have plenty of time, and when you halt for a rest now and then, I should like you just to think of Miss Mary Saunderson, and whether you treated her quite fairly." "You devil, what do you mean?" roared Kennedy. He was running about in little circles, clasping at the solid blackness with both hands. "Goodbye," said the mocking voice, and it was already at some distance. "I really do not think, Kennedy, even by your own showing, that you did the right thing by that girl. There was only one little thing which you appeared not to know, and I can supply it. Miss Saunderson was engaged to a poor, ungainly devil of a student, and his name was Julius Berger." There was a rustle somewhere, the vague sound of a foot striking a stone, and there fell silence upon that old Christian church, a stagnant, heavy silence, which closed round Kennedy and shut him in like water round a drowning man. Some 2 months afterward, the following paragraph made the round of the European press. "One of the most interesting discoveries of recent years is that of the new catacomb in Rome, which lies some distance to the east of the well-known vaults of St. Calixtus. The finding of this important burial place, which is exceeding rich in most interesting early Christian remains, is due to the energy and sagacity of Dr. Julius Berger, the young German specialist who is rapidly taking the first place as an authority upon ancient Rome. Although the first to publish his discovery, it appears that a less fortunate adventurer had anticipated Dr. Berger. Some months ago, Mr. Kennedy, the well-known English student, disappeared suddenly from his rooms in the Corso, and it was conjectured that his association with a recent scandal had driven him to leave Rome. It appears now that he had, in reality, fallen a victim to that fervid love of archaeology which had raised him to a distinguished place among living scholars. His body was discovered in the heart of the new catacomb, and it was evident from the condition of his feet and boots that he had tramped for days through the tortuous corridors which make these subterranean tombs so dangerous to explorers. The deceased gentleman had, with inexplicable rashness, made his way into this labyrinth without, as far as can be discovered, taking with him either candles or matches, so that his sad fate was the natural result of his own temerity. What makes the matter more painful is that Dr. Julius Berger was an intimate friend of the deceased. His joy at the extraordinary find, which he's been so fortunate as to make, has been greatly marred by the terrible fate of his comrade and fellow worker. Well, now, Kennedy sure did love an adventure. Funny thing, though, he didn't seem to enjoy the last one much. Sometimes the past don't need to haunt you. Sometimes it just waits, patiently, like a friend holding a candle at the top of a very long staircase and smiling as they let go. That was The New Catacomb by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. So, hang on now, kids. We ain't done. Our next tale takes us out of Rome and into the wild green hills of England, where something older than empire is still very much alive, and it doesn't like being disturbed. What if you went underground and found something waiting that wasn't supposed to be there? In our next tale, a doctor heads to the countryside to mend his lungs, but it's his mind that starts unraveling, one echo at a time. Strange sounds, vanishing livestock, and a tunnel the Romans built but had the sense to abandon. This one's a descent into madness, monsters, and the danger of looking too closely at what lies beneath. Without further ado, I present to you The Terror of Blue John Gap by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. The following narrative was found among the papers of Dr. James Hardcastle, who died of phthisis on February 4th, 1908, at age 36, Upper Coventry Flats, South Kensington. Those who knew him best, while refusing to express an opinion upon this particular statement, are unanimous in asserting that he was a man of sober and scientific turn of mind, absolutely devoid of imagination, and most unlikely to invent any abnormal series of events. The paper was contained in an envelope which was docketed, a short account of the circumstances which occurred near Miss Allerton's farm in northwest Derbyshire in the spring of last year. The envelope was sealed, and on the other side was written in pencil, "Dear Satan." It may interest, and perhaps pain you, to know that the incredulity with which you met my story has prevented me from ever opening my mouth upon the subject again. I leave this record after my death, and perhaps strangers may be found to have more confidence in me than my friend. Inquiry has failed to elicit who this Satan may have been. I may add that the visit of the deceased to Allerton's farm and the general nature of the alarm there, apart from this particular explanation, have been absolutely established. With this forward, I append this account exactly as I left it. It is in the form of a diary, some entries in which have been expanded, while a few have been erased. April 17th. Already I feel the benefit of this wonderful upland air. The farm of the Allerton lies 1,425 feet above sea level, so it may well be a bracing climate. Beyond the usual morning cough, I have very little discomfort, and what with the fresh milk and the home-ground mutton, I have every chance of putting on weight. I think Saunderson will be pleased. The two Miss Allertons are charmingly quaint and kind, two dear little hard-working old maids who are ready to lavish all their heart, which might have gone out to husband and to children, upon an invalid stranger. Truly, the old maid is the most useful person, one of the reserve forces of the community. They talk of the superfluous woman, but what would the poor superfluous man do without their kindly presence? By the way, in their simplicity, they very quickly let out the reason why Saunderson recommended their farm. The professor rose from the ranks himself, and I believe that in his youth he was not above scaring crows in these very fields. It is a most lonely spot, and the walks are picturesque in the extreme. The farm consists of grazing land lying at the bottom of an irregular valley. On each side are the fantastic limestone hills, formed of rock so soft that you can break it away with your hands. All this country is hollow. Could you strike it with some gigantic hammer, it would bloom like a drum, or possibly cave in altogether, and expose some huge subterranean sea. A great sea there must surely be, for on all sides of the streams run into the mountain itself, never to reappear. There are gaps everywhere amid the rocks, and when you pass through them you find yourself in great caverns, which wind down into the bowels of the earth. I have a small bicycle lamp, and it's a perpetual joy to me to carry it into these weird solitudes, and to see the many wonderful silver and black effect when I throw its light upon the stalactites which drape the lofty roofs. Shut off the lamp, and you are in the blackest darkness. Turn it on, and it is a scene from the Arabian Nights. But there is one of these strange openings in the earth which has a special interest, for it is the handiwork, not of nature, but of man. I had never heard of Blue John when I came to these parts. It's the name given to a peculiar mineral of a beautiful purple shade which is only found at one or two places in the world. It's so rare that an ordinary vase of Blue John would be valued at a great price. The Romans, with that extraordinary instinct of theirs, discovered that it was to be found in this valley, and sank a horizontal shaft deep into the mountainside. The opening of their mine had been called Blue John Gap, a clean-cut arch in the rock, the mouth all overgrown with bushes. It is a goodly passage which the Roman miners have cut, and it intersects some of the great water-worn caves, so that if you enter Blue John Gap, you would do well to mark your steps and to have a good store of candles, or you may never make your way back to the daylight again. I've not yet gone deeply into it, but this very day I stood at the mouth of the arched tunnel, and peering down into the black recesses beyond, I vowed that when my health returned, I would devote some holiday to exploring those mysterious depths and finding out for myself how far the Roman had penetrated into the Derbyshire hills. Strange how superstitious these countrymen are. I should have thought better of young Armitage, for he's a man of some education and character, and a very fine fellow for his station in life. I was standing at the Blue John Gap when he came across the field to me. "Well, Doctor," he said, "you're not afraid, anyhow." "Afraid," I answered. "Afraid of what?" "Of it," he said, with a jerk of his thumb toward the black vault, "of the terror that lives in the Blue John cave." How absurdly easy it is for a legend to arise in a lonely countryside. I examined him as to the reasons for his weird belief. It seems that from time to time sheep have been missing from the fields, carried bodily away, according to Armitage, that they could have wandered away on their own accord and disappeared among the mountains was an explanation to which he would not listen. On one occasion, a pool of blood had been found and some tufts of wool. That also, I pointed out, could be explained in a perfectly natural way. Further, the nights upon which the sheep disappeared were invariably very dark, cloudy nights with no moon. This I met with the obvious retort that those were the nights which a commonplace sheep-stealer would naturally choose for his work. On one occasion, a gap had been made in a wall, and some of the stones scattered for a considerable distance. Human agency again, in my opinion. Finally, Armitage clinched all his arguments by telling me that he had actually heard the creature. Indeed, that anyone could hear it who remained long enough at the gap. It was a distant roaring of an immense volume. I could not but smile at this, knowing, as I do, the strange reverberations which come out on an underground water system running amid the chasms of a limestone formation. My incredulity annoyed Armitage so that he turned and left me with some abruptness. And now comes the queer point about the whole business. I was still standing near the mouth of the cave, turning over in my mind the various statements of Armitage, and reflecting how readily they could be explained away, when suddenly, from the depth of the tunnel beside me, there issued a most extraordinary sound. How shall I describe it? First of all, it seemed to be a great distance away, far down in the bowels of the earth. Secondly, in spite of this suggestion of distance, it was very loud. Lastly, it was not a boom nor a crash, such as one would associate with falling water or tumbling rock, but it was a high whine, tremulous and vibrating, almost like the whinnying of a horse. It was certainly a most remarkable experience, and one which for a moment, I must admit, gave a new significance to Armitage's words. I waited by the Blue John Gap for half an hour or more, but there was no return of the sound, so at last I wandered back to the farmhouse, rather mystified by what had occurred. Decidedly, I shall explore that cavern when my strength is restored. Of course, Armitage's explanation is too absurd for discussion, and yet that sound was certainly very strange. It still rings in my ears as I write. April 20th. In the last 3 days I've made several expeditions to the Blue John Gap, and have even penetrated some short distance, but my bicycle lantern is so small and weak that I dare not trust myself very far. I shall do the thing more systematically. I've heard no sound at all, almost could believe that I had been the victim of some hallucination suggested, perhaps, by Armitage's conversation. Of course, the whole idea is absurd, and yet I must confess that those bushes at the entrance of the cave do present an appearance as if some heavy creature had forced its way through them. I begin to be keenly interested. I've said nothing to the Miss Allertons, for they are quite superstitious enough already, but I have bought some candles and mean to investigate for myself. I observed this morning that among the numerous tufts of sheep's wool which lay among the bushes near the cavern, there was one which was smeared with blood. Of course, my reason tells me that if sheep wander into such rocky places, they are likely to injure themselves, and yet somehow that splash of crimson gave me a sudden shock, and for a moment I found myself shrinking back in horror from the old Roman arch. A fetid breath seemed to ooze from the black depths into which I peered. Could it indeed be possible that some nameless thing, some dreadful presence, was lurking down yonder? I should have been incapable of such feelings in the days of my strength, but one grows more nervous and fanciful when one's health is shaken. For the moment I weakened in my resolution, and was ready to leave the secret of the old mine, if one exists, forever unsolved. But tonight my interest has returned and my nerves grown more steady. Tomorrow I trust that I shall have gone deeply into this matter. April 22nd. Let me try and set down as accurately as I can my extraordinary experience of yesterday. I started in the afternoon and made my way to the Blue John Gap. I confess that my misgivings returned as I gazed into its depths, and I wished that I had brought a companion to share my exploration. Finally, with a return of resolution, I lit my candle, pushed my way through the briars, and descended into the rocky shaft. I went down in an acute angle of some 50 feet, the floor being covered with broken stone. Thence there extended a long, straight passage cut into the solid rock. I'm no geologist, but the lining of this corridor was certainly of some harder material than limestone, for there were no points where I could actually see the tool marks which the old miners had left in their excavation, as fresh as if they had only been done yesterday. Down this strange old-world corridor I stumbled, my feeble flame throwing a dim circle of light around me, which made the shadows beyond the more threatening and obscure. Finally I came to a spot where the Roman tunnel opened into a water-worn cavern, a huge hall, hung with long white icicles of lime deposit, and from this central chamber I could dimly perceive that a number of passages worn by the subterranean streams wound away into the depths of the earth. I was standing there, wondering whether I had better return, or whether I dare venture farther into this dangerous labyrinth, when my eyes fell upon something at my feet which strongly arrested my attention. The greater part of the floor of the cavern was covered with boulders of rock or with hard incrustations of lime, but at this particular point there had been a drip from a distant roof which had left a patch of soft mud. In the very center of this there was a huge mark, an ill-defined blotch, deep, broad, and irregular, as if a great boulder had fallen upon it. No loose stone lay near, however, nor was there anything to account for the impression. It was far too large to be caused by any possible animal, and besides there was only the one, and the patch of mud was of such a size that no reasonable stride could have covered it. As I rose from the examination of that singular mark, and then looked around into the black shadows which hemmed me in, I must confess that I felt, for a moment, a most unpleasant sinking of my heart, and that, do what I could, the candle trembled in my outstretched hand. I soon recovered my nerve, however, when I reflected how absurd it was to associate so huge and shapeless a mark with the track of any known animal. Even an elephant could not have produced it. I determined, therefore, that I would not be scared by vague and senseless fears, from carrying out my exploration. Before proceeding, I took good note of a curious rock formation in the wall by which I could recognize the entrance of the Roman tunnel. The precaution was very necessary, for the great cave, so far as I could see it, was intersected by passages. Having made sure of my position and reassured myself by examining my spare candles and my matches, I advanced slowly over the rocky and uneven surface of the cavern. And now I come to the point where I met with such sudden and desperate disaster. A stream, some 20 feet broad, ran across my path, and I walked for some little distance along the bank to find a spot where I could cross dry shod. Finally, I came to a place where a single flat boulder lay in the center, which I could reach in a stride. As it chanced, however, the rock had been cut away and made top-heavy by the rush of the stream, so that it tilted over as I landed on it and shot me into the ice-cold water. My candle went out, and I found myself floundering about in utter and absolute darkness. I staggered to my feet again, more amused than alarmed by my adventure. The candle had fallen from my hand and was lost in the stream, but I had 2 others in my pocket, so that was of no importance. I had gotten one of them ready and drew out my box of matches to light it. Only then did I realize my position. The box had been soaked in my fall into the river. It was impossible to strike the matches. A cold hand seemed to close round my heart as I realized my position. The darkness was opaque and horrible. It was so utter, one put one's hand up to one's face as if to press off something solid. I stood still, and by an effort I steadied myself. I tried to reconstruct in my mind a map of the floor of the cavern as I had last seen it. Alas, the bearings which had impressed themselves upon my mind were high on the wall, and not to be found by touch. Still, I remembered in a general way how the sides were situated, and I hoped that by groping my way along them I should at last come to the opening of the Roman tunnel. Moving very slowly, and continually striking against the rocks, I set out on this desperate quest. But I very soon realized how impossible it was. In that black, velvety darkness, one lost all one's bearings in an instant. Before I made a dozen paces, I was utterly bewildered as to my whereabouts. The rippling of the stream, which was the one sound audible, showed me where it lay, but the moment that I left its bank, I was utterly lost. The idea of finding my way back in absolute darkness through the limestone labyrinth was clearly an impossible one. I sat down upon a boulder and reflected upon my unfortunate plight. I had not told anyone that I proposed to come to the Blue John mine, and it was unlikely that a search party would come after me. Therefore, I must trust to my own resources to get clear of the danger. There was only one hope, and that was that the matches might dry. When I fell into the river, only half of me had got thoroughly wet. My left shoulder had remained above the water. I took the box of matches, therefore, and put it into my left armpit. The moist air of the cavern might possibly be counteracted by the heat of my body, but even so I knew that I could not hope to get a light for many hours. Meanwhile, there was nothing for it but to wait. By good luck, I had slipped several biscuits in my pocket before I left the farmhouse. These I now devoured, and washed them down with a draught from that wretched stream which had been the cause of all my misfortunes. Then I felt about for a comfortable seat among the rocks, and having discovered a place where I could get a support for my back, I stretched out my legs and settled myself down to wait. I was wretchedly damp and cold, but I tried to cheer myself with the reflection that modern science prescribed open windows and walks in all weather for my disease. Gradually, lulled by the monotonous gurgle of the stream and by the absolute darkness, I sank into an uneasy slumber. How long this lasted, I cannot say. It may have been for an hour, it may have been for several. Suddenly I sat up on my rock couch, with every nerve thrilling and every sense acutely on the alert. Beyond all doubt, I had heard a sound, some sound very distinct from the gurgling of the waters. It had passed, but the reverberation of it still lingered in my ear. Was it a search party? Would they most certainly have shouted? And vague as this sound was, which had wakened me, it was very distinct from the human voice. I sat palpitating and hardly daring to breathe. There was again, and again. Now it had become continuous. It was a tread. Yes, surely it was the tread of some living creature. But what a tread it was! It gave one the impression of enormous weight carried upon sponge-like feet, which gave forth a muffled but ear-filling sound. The darkness was as complete as ever, but the tread was regular and decisive, and it was coming, beyond all question, in my direction. My skin grew cold, and my hair stood on end as I listened to that steady and ponderous footfall. There was some creature there, and surely by the speed of its advance, it was one which could see in the dark. I crouched low on my rock and tried to blend myself into it. The steps grew nearer still and then stopped, and presently I was aware of a loud lapping and gurgling. The creature was drinking at the stream. Then again there was silence, broken by a succession of long sniffs and snorts of tremendous volume and energy. Had it caught the scent of me? My own nostrils were filled by a low fetid odor, mephitic and abominable. Then I heard the steps again. They were on my side of the stream now. The stones rattled within a few yards of where I lay. Hardly daring to breathe, I crouched upon my rock. Then the steps drew away. I heard the splash as it returned across the river, and the sound died away into the distance in the direction from which it had come. For a long time I lay upon the rock, too much horrified to move. I thought of the sound which I had heard coming from the depths of the cave, of Armitage's fears, of the strange impression in my mind, and now came this final and absolute proof that there was indeed some inconceivable monster, something utterly unearthly and dreadful, which lurked in the hollow of the mountain. Of its nature or form I could frame no conception, save that it was both light-footed and gigantic. The combat between my reason, which told me such things could not be, and my senses, which told me that they were, raged within me as I lay. Finally, I was almost ready to persuade myself that this experience had been part of some evil dream, and that my abnormal condition might have conjured up an hallucination. But there remained one final experience which removed the last possibility of doubt from my mind. I had taken my matches from my armpit and felt them. They seemed perfectly hard and dry. Stooping down into a crevice of rocks, I tried one of them. To my delight, it took fire at once. I lit the candle, and with a terrified backward glance into the obscure depths of the cavern, I hurried in the direction of the Roman passage. As I did so, I passed the patch of mud on which I had seen the huge imprint. Now I stood astonished before it, for there were 3 similar imprints upon its surface, enormous in size, irregular in outline, of a depth which indicated the ponderous weight which they had left them. Then a great terror surged over me. Stooping and shading my candle with my hand, I ran in a frenzy of fear to the rocky archway, hastened up it, and never stopped until, with weary feet and panting lungs, I rushed up the final slope of stones, broke through the tangle of briars, and flung myself, exhausted, upon the soft grass under the peaceful light of the stars. It was 3 a.m. when I reached the farmhouse, and today I am all unstrung and quivering after my terrific adventure. As yet, have told no one. I must move warily in the matter. What would the poor, lonely women or the uneducated yokels here think of it if I were to tell them my experience? Let me go to someone who can understand and advise. April 25. I was laid up in bed for 2 days after my incredible adventure in the cavern. I use the adjective with a very definite meaning, for I have had an experience since which has shocked me almost as much as the other. I said that I was looking around for someone who could advise me. There is a Dr. Mark Johnson who practices some few miles away, to whom I had a note of recommendation from Professor Saunderson. To him I drove when I was strong enough to get about, and I recounted to him my whole strange experience. He listened intently, then carefully examined me, paying special attention to my reflexes and to the pupils of my eyes. When he had finished, he refused to discuss my adventure, saying that it was entirely beyond him, but he gave me the card of a Mr. Picton at Castleton, with the advice that I should instantly go to him and tell him the story exactly as I had done to himself. He was, according to my adviser, the very man who was preeminently suited to help me. I went on to the station, therefore, and made my way to the little town, which is some 10 miles away. Mr. Picton appeared to be a man of importance, as his brass plate was displayed upon the door of a considerable building on the outskirts of town. I was about to ring his bell when some misgiving came into my mind, and, crossing to a neighborhood shop, I asked the man behind the counter if he could tell me anything of Mr. Picton. "Why," said he, "he's the best mad doctor in Derbyshire, and yonder is his asylum." You can imagine that it was not long before I had shaken the dust of Castleton from my feet and returned to the farm, cursing all unimaginative pedants who cannot conceive that there may be things in creation which have never yet chanced to come across their mole's vision. After all, now that I'm cooler, I can afford to admit that I've been no more sympathetic to Armitage than Dr. Johnson has been to me. April 27. When I was a student, I had the reputation of being a man of courage and enterprise. I remember that when there was a ghost hunt at Coltbridge, it was I who sat up in the haunted house. Is it advancing years? After all, I am only 35. Or is it this physical malady which has caused degeneration? Certainly my heart quails when I think of that horrible cavern in hell, and the certainty that it has some monstrous occupant. What shall I do? There's not an hour in the day that I do not debate the question. If I say nothing, then the mystery remains unsolved. If I do say anything, then I have the alternative of mad alarm over the whole countryside, or of absolute incredulity, which may end in consigning me to an asylum. On the whole, I think that my best course is to wait, and to prepare for some expedition which shall be more deliberate and better thought out than the last. As a first step, I've been to Castleton and obtained a few essentials, a large acetylene lantern for one thing, and a good double-barreled sporting rifle for another. The latter I have hired, but I have bought a dozen heavy-game cartridges, which would bring down a rhinoceros. Now I'm ready for my troglodyte friend. Give me better health and a little spate of energy, and I shall try conclusions with him yet. But who and what is he? Ah, there is the question which stands between me and my sleep. How many theories do I form, only to discard each in turn? Is it all so utterly unthinkable? And yet this cry, the footmark, the tread in the cavern, no reasoning can get past these, I think, of the old-world legends of dragons and other monsters. Were they, perhaps, not such fairy tales as we have thought? Can it be that there is some fact in which underlies them, and am I, of all mortals, the one who is chosen to expose it? May 3. For several days I've been laid up by the vagaries of an English spring, and during those days there have been developments, the true and sinister meaning of which no one can appreciate save myself. I may say that we have had cloudy and moonless nights of late, which, according to my information, were the seasons upon which sheep disappeared. Well, sheep have disappeared. 2 of Miss Allerton's, 1 of old Pearson's of the catwalk, and 1 of Mrs. Moulton's. 4 in all during 3 nights. No trace is left of them at all, and the countryside is buzzing with rumors of gypsies and of sheep-stealers. But there's something more serious than that. Young Armitage has disappeared also. He left his moorland cottage early on Wednesday night and has never been heard of since. He was an unattached man, so there is less sensation than would otherwise be the case. The popular explanation is that he owes money and has found a situation in some other part of the country. Hence, he will presently write for his belongings. But I have grave misgivings. It is not much more likely that the recent tragedy of the sheep has caused him to take some steps which may have ended in his own destruction. He may, for example, have lain in wait for the creature and been carried off by it into the recesses of the mountains. What an inconceivable fate for a civilized Englishman of the 20th century. And yet I feel that it is possible and even probable. But in that case, how far am I answerable both for his death and for any other mishap which may occur? Surely, with the knowledge I already possess, it must be my duty to see that something is done, or, if necessary, to do it myself. It must be the latter, for this morning I went down to the local police station and told my story. The inspector entered it all into a large book, and bowed me out with commendable gravity, but I heard a burst of laughter before I got down his garden path. No doubt he was recounting my adventure to his family. June 10. I'm writing this, propped up in bed 6 weeks after my last entry in this journal. I've gone through a terrible shock, both to mind and body, arising from such an experience as seldom befallen a human being before. But I've attained my end. The danger from the terror which dwells in the Blue John Gap has passed never to return. Thus much, at least, I, a broken invalid, have done for the common good. Let me now recount what occurred as clearly as I may. The night of Friday, May 3rd, was dark and cloudy, the very night for the monster to walk. About 11 o'clock I went from the farmhouse with my lantern and my rifle, having first left a note upon the table of my bedroom in which I said that if I were missing, search should be made for me in the direction of the gap. I made my way to the mouth of the Roman shaft, and having perched myself among the rocks close to the opening, I shut off my lantern and waited patiently with my loaded rifle ready to my hand. It was a melancholy vigil. All down the winding valley I could see the scattered lights of the farmhouses and the church clock of Chapel le Dale tolling the hours that came faintly to my ears. These tokens of my fellow men served only to make my own position seem the more lonely, and to call for a greater effort to overcome the terror which tempted me continually to get back to the farm and abandon forever this dangerous quest. And yet there lies deep in every man a rooted self-respect which makes it hard for him to turn back from that which he has once undertaken. This feeling of personal pride was my salvation now, and it was that alone which held me fast when every instinct of my nature was dragging me away. I'm glad now that I had the strength. In spite of all that it has cost me, my manhood is at least above reproach. 12 o'clock struck in the distant church, then 1, then 2. It was the darkest hour of the night. The clouds were drifting low, and there was not a star in the sky. An owl was hooting somewhere among the rocks, but no other sound, save the gentle sough of the wind that came to my ears. And then suddenly I heard it. From far away down the tunnel came those muffled steps, so soft and yet so ponderous. I heard also the rattle of stones as they gave way under the giant tread. They drew nearer. They were close upon me. I heard the crashing of the bushes round the entrance, and then dimly through the darkness I was conscious of the loom of some enormous shape, some monstrous, inchoate creature, passing swiftly and very silently out from the tunnel. I was paralyzed with fear and amazement. Long as I had waited, now that it had actually come, I was unprepared for the shock. I lay motionless and breathless, whilst the great dark mass whisked by me and was swallowed up in the night. But now I nerved myself for its return. No sound came from the sleeping countryside to tell of the horror which was loose. In no way could I judge how far off it was, what it was doing, or when it might come back. But not a second time should my nerve fail me. Not a second time should it pass unchallenged. I swore it beneath my clenched teeth as I laid my cocked rifle across the rock. And yet it nearly happened. There was no warning of approach now as the creature passed over the grass. Suddenly, like a dark, drifting shadow, the huge bulk loomed up once more before me, making for the entrance of the cave. Again came that paralysis of volition which held my crooked forefinger impotent upon the trigger. But with a desperate effort I shook it off, even as the brushwood rustled and the monstrous beast blended with the shadow of the gap. I fired at the retreating form. In a blaze of the gun I caught a glimpse of the great shaggy mass. Something was rough and bristling hair of a withered gray color, fading away to white in its lower parts, the huge body supported upon short, thick, curving legs. I had just that glance, and then I heard the rattle of the stones as the creature tore down into its burrow. In an instant, with a triumphant revulsion of feeling, I had cast my fears to the wind, and uncovering my powerful lantern, with my rifle in my hand, I sprang down from my rock and rushed after the monster down the old Roman shaft. My splendid lamp cast a brilliant flood of vivid light in front of me, very different from the yellow glimmer which had aided me down the same passage only 12 days before. As I ran, I saw the great beast lurching along before me, its huge bulk filling up the whole space from wall to wall. Its hair looked like coarse faded oakum and hung down in long, dense masses, which swayed as it moved. It was like an enormous, unclipped sheep in its fleece, but in size it was far larger than the largest elephant, and its breadth seemed to be nearly as great as its height. It fills me with amazement now to think that I should have dared to follow such a horror into the bowels of the earth, but when one's blood is up and when one's quarry seems to be flying, the old primeval hunting spirit awakes, and prudence is cast to the wind. Rifle in hand, I ran at the top of my speed upon the trail of the monster. I had seen that the creature was swift. Now I was to find out at my cost that it was also very cunning. I'd imagined that it was in panic flight, and that I had only to pursue it. The idea that it might turn upon me never entered my excited brain. I've already explained that the passage down, which I was racing, opened into a great central cave. Into this I rushed, fearful lest I should lose all trace of the beast. But he had turned upon his own traces, and in a moment we were face to face. That picture, seen in the brilliant white light of the lantern, is etched forever upon my brain. He had reared up on his hind legs as a bear would do, and stood above me, enormous, menacing, such a creature as no nightmare had ever brought to my imagination. I've said that he reared like a bear, and there was something bear-like, if one could conceive a bear which was tenfold the bulk of any bear seen upon earth, in his whole pose and attitude, in his great crooked forelegs with their ivory-white claws, in his rugged skin, and in his red, gaping mouth, fringed with monstrous fangs. Only in one point did he differ from the bear, or from any other creature which walks the earth, and even at that supreme moment a shudder of horror passed over me, as I observed that the eyes which glistened in the glow of my lantern were huge projecting bulbs, white and sightless. For a moment his great paws swung over my head. The next he fell forward upon me. I and my broken lantern crashed to the earth, and I remember no more. When I came to myself, I was back at the farmhouse of the Allertons. 2 days had passed since my terrible adventure in the Blue John Gap. It seems that I had lain all night in the cave, insensible from concussion of the brain, with my left arm and 2 ribs badly fractured. In the morning my note had been found, a search party of 12 farmers assembled, and I had been tracked down and carried back to my bedroom, where I had lain in high delirium ever since. There was, it seems, no sign of the creature, no bloodstain which would show that my bullet had found him as he passed. Save for my own plight and the marks upon the mud, there was nothing to prove that what I said was true. 6 weeks have now elapsed, and I am able to sit out once more in the sunshine. Just opposite me is a steep hillside, gray with shaly rock, and yonder on its flank is the dark cleft which marks the opening of the Blue John Gap. But it is no longer a source of terror. Never again through that ill-omened tunnel shall any strange shape flit out into the world of men. The educated and the scientific, the Dr. Johnsons and the like, may smile at my narrative, but the poorer folk of the countryside had never a doubt as to its truth. On the day after my recovering consciousness, they assembled in their hundreds round the Blue John Gap. As the Castleton courier said, it was useless for our correspondent, or for any of the adventurous gentlemen who had come from Matlock, Buxton, and other parts, to offer to descend, to explore the cave to the end, and to finally test the extraordinary narrative of Dr. James Hardcastle. The country people had taken the matter into their own hands, and from an early hour of the morning they had worked hard in stopping up the entrance of the tunnel. There is a sharp slope where the shaft begins, and great boulders, rolled along by many willing hands, were thrust down it until the gap was absolutely sealed. So ends the episode which has caused such excitement throughout the country. Local opinion is fiercely divided upon the subject. On the one hand are those who point to Dr. Hardcastle's impaired health and to the possibility of cerebral lesions of tubercular origin giving rise to strange hallucinations. Some idea fix, according to these gentlemen, caused the doctor to wander down the tunnel, and a fall among the rocks was sufficient to account for his injuries. On the other hand, a legend of a strange creature in the gap has existed for some months back, and the farmers look upon Dr. Hardcastle's narrative and his personal injuries as a final corroboration. So the matter stands, and so the matter will continue to stand, for no definitive solution seems to us to be now possible. It transcends human wit to give any scientific explanation which could cover the alleged facts. Perhaps before the courier published these words, they would have been wise to send their representative to me. I have thought the matter out, as no one else has occasion to do, and it is possible that I might have removed some of the more obvious difficulties of the narrative, and brought it 1 degree nearer to scientific acceptance. Let me, then, write down the only explanation which seems to me to elucidate what I know to my cost have been a series of facts. My theory may seem to be wildly improbable, but at least no one can venture to say that it is impossible. My view is, and it is formed, as is shown by my diary, before my personal adventure, that in this part of England there is a vast subterranean lake or sea, which is fed by the great number of streams which pass down through the limestone. Where there is a large collection of water, there must also be some evaporation, mists or rain, and a possibility of vegetation. This, in turn, suggests that there may be animal life arising, as the vegetable life would also do, from those seeds and types which had been introduced at an early period of the world's history, when communication with the outer air was more easy. This place had then developed a fauna and flora of its own, including such monsters as the one which I had seen, which may well have been the old cave bear, enormously enlarged and modified by its new environment. For countless eons, the internal and the external creation had kept apart, growing steadily away from each other. Then there had come some rift in the depths of the mountain, which had enabled one creature to wander up and, by means of the Roman tunnel, to reach the open air. Like all subterranean life, it had lost the power of sight, but this had no doubt been compensated for by nature in other directions. Certainly it had some means of finding its way about, and of hunting down the sheep upon the hillside. As to its choice of dark nights, it is part of my theory that light was painful to those great white eyeballs, and that it was only a pitch-black world which it could tolerate. Perhaps, indeed, it was the glare of my lantern which saved my life at that awful moment when we were face to face. So I read the riddle. I leave these facts behind me, and if you can explain them, do so. Or if you choose to doubt them, do so. Neither your belief nor your incredulity can alter them, nor affect one whose task is nearly over. So ended the strange narrative of Dr. James Hardcastle. They say the earth forgets, but maybe it just waits until someone like Dr. Hardcastle comes along to stir it up again. Poor man wanted answers. Got 'em, too, just not in the way he hoped. Some knowledge don't elevate us, kids. It swallows us up whole. That was The Terror of Blue John Gap, also by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And between that and The New Catacomb, I'd say tonight's lesson is a simple one. Don't go looking where the ground opens up and beckons. Whether it's Rome or Derbyshire, there's a reason some places stay dark, a reason some stories were never meant to be dug up. My thanks to Sir Arthur, wherever he's listening from, for reminding us that even the old masters knew how to twist a knife with elegance. And thank you, my firelit friends, for sharing the night with me. I'll be right here next Wednesday, waiting by the fire, with more tales that scrape at the bones and echo in the dark. Until then, keep your light steady, keep your thoughts clean, and whatever you do, don't follow the footprints if they lead down. Good night from Camp Duskwood.
Chilling tales for dark nights.